The grand spires of House Vissen's estate pierced the ochre evening sky of Corva Prime, catching the last crimson rays of the setting sun. Tiara Vissen stood at the immense bay window of her chamber, watching the approaching shuttle as it sliced through wisps of high cloud, bearing the family insignia of gold and crimson. Her father was returning from yet another diplomatic mission. "Milady," a servant's voice came from behind her. "Lord Nathaniel's shuttle has entered the estate's airspace. He requests your presence in the grand hall upon his arrival." Tiara nodded without turning. "I'll be there." Her fingers absently touched the delicate necklace at her throat, solid gold with the House Vissen crest, a symbol of her bloodline and position. Unlike the control collars worn by servants and pets in their household, hers was merely decorative, a symbol of status rather than subjugation. At 17, Tiara was the sole heir to House Vissen, one of the 12 noble houses that governed Corva Prime under the Alderaan Empire's watchful eye. Her education had been impeccable, her bearing regal, her future predetermined. Marriage to another noble house awaited her eventually, some strategic alliance to strengthen her father's position in the complex political landscape of the empire. She made her way down the sweeping marble staircase, her pale blue dress flowing behind her. Servants bowed as she passed, their golden collars gleaming under the soft ambient light. Some were human, others were exotic species from conquered worlds. All wore the mark of House Vissen ownership. The grand hall opened before her, a cavernous space of polished stone and soaring arches. Nathaniel Vissen, a tall, imposing man with silver-streaked dark hair, stood near the entrance. His expression brightened upon seeing his daughter. "Tiara, my dear," he called, arms outstretched. "Welcome home, father." She embraced him briefly, noting the lines of fatigue around his eyes. Nathaniel smiled, a certain mischief dancing in his expression. "I brought something special for you. A gift." Tiara raised an eyebrow, accustomed to her father's extravagant presence. Last time, it had been a rare, crystalline songbird from the forests of Menther. Before that, a miniature, shape-shifting creature that could take the form of any small object. House Vissen's menagerie was famous throughout the Empire, a testament to Nathaniel's status and connections. "What is it this time?" she asked, offering a small smile. Nathaniel gestured to his guards. "Bring him in." The doors at the far end opened, and 2 armored guards entered, flanking a figure unlike any of the house servants. Even from a distance, Tiara could tell this was no ordinary acquisition. The newcomer was tall and lean, with an unusual grace to his movements despite the heavy restraints. His hair was startlingly white platinum, almost luminescent against his tan skin. But most striking were his eyes, pale, almost colorless, yet somehow burning with an intensity that made Tiara take an involuntary step backward. Around his neck was a collar, thicker than the standard servant issue, reinforced with what appeared to be specialized dampening technology. It was plated with the same gold as her necklace, the House Vissen symbol prominently displayed. "What is he?" Tiara asked, unable to hide her fascination. Nathaniel's smile widened. "Daughter, you want a new pet, but this one talks, fights, and claims he's the—" He paused dramatically, amused by his own joke. "Well, let's just say he's quite the fascinating specimen. He comes from Delvos." Delvos? The name sparked recognition. Delvos was one of the outer worlds that had resisted imperial rule until its spectacular fall a decade ago. Its people were now scattered across the empire, most serving as laborers or, in rare cases, household servants for the wealthy. But Tiara had never seen one with features like this. "He was extraordinarily expensive," Nathaniel continued. "They say he injured several handlers before they managed to properly restrain him. Something of a fighter, which I thought might amuse you more than those docile creatures you've grown tired of." He gestured to the guards. "Remove his speech restraint. Let my daughter hear his voice." One guard approached cautiously and adjusted something on the collar. The figure remained perfectly still during this process, but his pale eyes tracked the guard's every movement. "Go ahead," Nathaniel urged Tiara. "Ask him something." Tiara stepped forward, studying the unusual pet, with undisguised curiosity. He was dressed simply in a gray tunic and pants, standard for high-value acquisitions before they were fitted with household attire. "What's your name?" she asked. There was a moment of silence. The figure regarded her with those unsettling eyes, assessing. Then, in perfect, unaccented common, the language of the Empire, he spoke. "I am Calden." His voice was deeper than she expected, clear and without the submissive inflection typical of servants and captives. "He speaks common," Tiara remarked, surprised. "Most slaves require translation implants or years of training." "Oh yes," Nathaniel said. "He's quite fluent. One of the reasons he commanded such a high price." Tiara circled Calden slowly, noting his perfect stillness, the controlled rhythm of his breathing. "Are you truly from Delvos?" Again, that measuring look before he answered. "I'm of Delvos blood, yes." Something in his phrasing caught her attention. Not from Delvos, but of Delvos blood. A subtle distinction, but Tiara had been raised to notice such nuances. "And what were you on Delvos?" she pressed. "Before you came here?" A flicker of something, pride, defiance, or perhaps pain, crossed his features. "I'm not what they claim. I'm not a pet, nor a slave." Nathaniel laughed. "You see? Quite entertaining. They say he insists he's some sort of lost royalty. A prince without a throne, perhaps." "It's not a claim," Calden said quietly, his gaze now locked with Tiara's. "It's the truth. I am the rightful heir to a legacy your empire tried to erase." The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. The guards tensed, hands moving closer to their weapons. Nathaniel's smile faded slightly. "That's enough for now," he said, his tone hardening. "Guard, restore the speech restraint." As the guard approached, Calden's eyes never left Tiara's face. Even as the restraint was reactivated, the intensity of his gaze communicated what his voice no longer could. Tiara felt a chill run through her, not of fear, but of something more complex. For the first time, she wondered if her father had brought home something more dangerous than he realized. Have him properly attired and settled in the secure quarters adjacent to the menagerie, Nathaniel instructed the head servant. "My daughter will want to become better acquainted with her new acquisition tomorrow." As Calden was led away, Tiara caught a final glimpse of those pale eyes, and the disturbing thought occurred to her that they didn't look like the eyes of someone being led to captivity, but rather those of someone who had just found exactly what they had been searching for. Later that night, Tiara stood on her balcony, gazing at the 3 moons of Corva Prime as they cast their ghostly light across the estate grounds. Far below, she could see the specially reinforced chamber where Calden was being kept, luxurious by most standards, but a prison nonetheless. Through the panoramic window of his quarters, she could just make out his silhouette, standing as she was looking up at the same sky. His lips were moving slightly, as though speaking to the stars. A promise, perhaps, or a reminder of some unfinished mission. Delvos had been a mystery to most citizens of the Empire, a distant world rich in rare resources, but inhabited by a people who had stubbornly resisted imperial integration. The official history taught that Delvos had ultimately been pacified for its own good, its primitive population given the opportunity to join civilized society through service to the Empire. But Tiara had always sensed there was more to the story than what appeared in her educational programs. And now, a piece of that mystery was residing in her home, wearing her family's mark around his neck, yet somehow conveying the impression that he was anything but owned. "What are you really?" she whispered in the night air. "And what does it mean that you're here?" She received no answer except the soft hum of the estate's security field and the distant sounds of nocturnal creatures in the ornamental gardens. But somehow, Tiara knew with absolute certainty that her life had just changed irrevocably, and that the man with the pale eyes was at the center of that change. The morning brought with it the familiar rhythms of House Vissen's daily operations. Servants moved with practiced efficiency through the sprawling estate, attending to their assigned duties under the watchful eyes of household overseers. In the eastern wing, exotic creatures from a dozen worlds received their carefully tailored nutrition and habitat maintenance. Some were merely decorative, Beautiful, alien flowers that changed color with the angle of light. Tiny flying creatures that formed complex moving patterns when released into the air. Others served specific purposes. Guard beasts with enhanced senses, bioengineered companions programmed for perfect loyalty. House Vissen's renowned collection reflected not just wealth, but influence. Many of the specimens had been gifts from other noble houses or acquisitions that required special imperial dispensation. Tiara had always found a certain peace in a menagerie. Unlike the rigid formality that governed interactions with other nobles, or the carefully measured subservience of household servants, the creatures responded to her with a simpler honesty. They either trusted or they didn't. They were either content or distressed. There was a clarity to their existence that Tiara sometimes envied. She paused before the newest addition to the household. Calden had been provided with attire bearing the Vissen colors, deep blue and gold, though the cut was distinctly different from that of the regular household staff. It emphasized his unusual physicality without attempting to disguise his alien origin. The heavy restraint collar remained, a reminder of his status despite the improved accommodations. He stood as she approached, his posture neither servile nor overtly defiant. Just waiting. I've decided to allow you limited speech privileges, Tiara announced, activating the control panel outside his quarters. There will be consequences if you abuse this concession. The subtle shift in the collar's indicator lights confirmed the change in settings. Calden inclined his head slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to communicate acknowledgement without submission. Thank you, he said simply. Tiara studied him with open curiosity. In the daylight, his strange coloring was even more apparent. The white platinum hair seemed to have an inner luminescence, and his pale eyes reflected light in a way that was not quite human. What are you? She asked directly. I mean, your species. I've seen Delvosians before, but none that look like you. I am Delvosian, he replied, but I am of the ancient bloodline, what your people might call the royal line. Tiara raised an eyebrow. And you expect me to believe that my father purchased Delvosian royalty as a pet? Your father purchased what he believed to be a rare specimen. The traders who captured me knew I was valuable, but didn't understand why. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The Empire has worked very hard to erase the truth of Delvos. That there are those of us who cannot be fully controlled. Remember what was taken. Something in his tone made Tiara uneasy. If you're so special, why are you here? Why not dead, if you're such a threat? Death creates martyrs, Calden said simply. Better to disappear troublesome elements. Transform them into curiosities, specimens, pets. He spoke the last word with quiet emphasis. Tiara frowned. You're saying the Empire deliberately captured you to prevent you from, what? Leading some kind of rebellion. Calden's gaze was steady. I'm saying the Empire has methods beyond simple extermination when dealing with those they fear. Fear? The Alderaan Empire doesn't fear anything. We've brought order to 1,000 worlds. So they've taught you. His voice remained calm, matter of fact. Just as they've taught you that your birthright entitles you to own others. To see thinking beings as possessions. Tiara felt a flash of indignation. You know nothing about me, or what I've been taught. I know the collar around my neck bears the same symbol as the pendant around yours, Calden observed. One marks ownership. What is the other mark, I wonder? The question struck Tiara with unexpected force. She had never considered her family crest as anything but a symbol of pride and heritage. To have it compared to a control collar was jarring. Before she could formulate a response, the door to the menagerie opened, and Nathaniel entered, accompanied by 2 household guards. Ah, getting acquainted with your new acquisition? He asked pleasantly, though his eyes were sharply assessing the situation. Yes, father. He's unusual. Nathaniel approached, studying Calden with the practiced eye of a collector. Indeed, I've been reading more of the documentation that came with him. Apparently, his kind were the ruling caste on Delvos before Imperial integration. Something about genetic memory and ancestral connections to the planet itself. He chuckled lightly. Primitive mysticism, of course, but it would explain some of his physical anomalies. It's not mysticism, Calden said quietly. It's science your empire chose not to understand before destroying it. Nathaniel's eyebrows rose at the direct address. I see you've allowed him speech. Bold choice. He turned to Tiara. We have guests arriving this evening. Representatives from House Meridian and several Imperial officials. I thought perhaps you might want to showcase your new pet as part of the entertainment. Tiara glanced at Calden, noting the subtle tension that had entered his frame at her father's words. What did you have in mind? She asked carefully. Nothing elaborate. Perhaps have him demonstrate some Delvosian cultural practices. They say his people had quite remarkable abilities before they were civilized. Nathaniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. It would be an opportunity to display House Vissen's continuing commitment to preserving elements of pre-integration cultures. The euphemism was familiar to Tiara. Preserving elements meant displaying conquered peoples and their artifacts as curiosities, reminders of the Empire's reach and power. She glanced again at Calden, whose expression had gone carefully blank, though something burned behind those colorless eyes. I'm not sure he's ready for public display, Tiara said, surprising herself with the protective note in her voice. He's only just arrived. Nathaniel's gaze sharpened slightly. Nonsense. These specimens are conditioned for obedience. Besides, he added with a meaningful glance at the control panel, we have ways of ensuring cooperation. Something twisted uncomfortably in Tiara's chest. She had never questioned the methods used to condition the beings that became part of their household. It was simply how things were done, necessary, she had been told, for the safety of all concerned. But looking at Calden now, she found it hard to reconcile the intelligence in those pale eyes with the idea that he needed to be forcibly controlled. I'll consider it, she said finally, but I prefer to work with him first to understand what he's capable of. Nathaniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. But remember, Tiara, while I encourage your interest in our collections, never forget what they are. Especially this one. He cast a cold glance at Calden. The documentation was quite clear about his capacity for violence. Don't mistake an articulate pet for a civilized one. With that warning, he departed, leaving Tiara alone again with Calden and the uneasy silence that followed. He expects you to make me perform, Calden observed quietly. To dance and entertain his guests. Tiara turned to him, a surge of defensive anger rising. Is that so different from what your kind did with their own servants when Delvos was independent? Every society has its hierarchies. There is a difference between service and slavery, he replied, between respect and subjugation. And how would I know that difference? She challenged. When all I've ever known is the Empire's way. For the first time, something like sympathy softened his gaze. You wouldn't. That's the tragedy of empire. It doesn't just enslave the conquered. It chains the minds of its own children as well. Tiara wanted to dismiss his words as the propaganda of a defeated enemy. But there was something in his tone, not accusation, but a genuine sadness that gave her pause. What would you have me do? She asked, half in frustration, half in genuine curiosity. Defy my father? Release you to wander the empire as a fugitive? I have responsibilities, expectations. Golden chains, Calden interjected softly. You live in a gilded cage, Tiara Vissen. Different from mine, but a cage nonetheless. She stared at him, startled by the use of her name, without title or honorific. No servant would dare such familiarity. You forget your place, she said, but the words rang hollow even to her own ears. No, he replied with quiet certainty. I know exactly what I am and where I stand. The question is, do you? With that unsettling question lingering in the air, Tiara retreated, troubled by emotions she couldn't quite name. Compassion, yes, but also an unsettling sense that there might be truth in his words. Truth that threatened the very foundations of the world she had been raised to inherit. That evening, as House Vissen's grand hall filled with the elite of Corva Prime, Tiara found herself moving through the familiar motions of high society with an unfamiliar sense of disconnect. She greeted guests with practiced grace, engaged in the expected political small talk, and performed her role as the daughter of House Vissen flawlessly. Yet her thoughts repeatedly strayed to the strange captive in the menagerie wing and the uncomfortable questions he had raised. Lady Tiara, a smooth voice interrupted her reverie. You seem distracted this evening. Not planning some mischief, I hope. She turned to find Lord Varric observing her with his customary calculating smile. As the Empire's High Commissioner for Corva Prime, Varric was a frequent guest at House Vissen events, though Tiara had never warmed to him. There was something predatory about the way his gaze assessed everyone in a room, as though constantly searching for weakness or advantage. Lord Varric, she acknowledged with a slight incline of her head, merely contemplating some new additions to our collection. Nothing that would concern Imperial oversight. Varric's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened with interest. I heard whispers that Nathaniel acquired something quite extraordinary recently. A true Delvosian elder, they say. I will be most interested in seeing such a specimen. For academic purposes, of course. Something in his tone set off alarm bells in Tiara's mind. Before she could formulate a suitably vague response, Nathaniel appeared at her side. Varric, hounded my daughter about our private collections, he said with forced joviality. Some things are best appreciated by those with the proper perspective. Varric's smile thinned. Slightly. The Empire takes great interest in cultural preservation, Nathaniel, particularly when it concerns elements from historically problematic regions. The tension beneath their polite exchange was palpable. Tiara glanced between the two men, sensing undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Father, she said, deliberately changing the subject, I believe the Meridian delegation was hoping to discuss the proposed trade route expansions with you before dinner. Nathaniel seized the opportunity. Indeed. You'll excuse us, Varric? Duty calls. As they moved away, Nathaniel placed a hand on Tiara's arm, his grip firmer than usual. Keep that new acquisition out of sight tonight, he murmured. Varric has been pushing for more direct imperial control over private collections, especially those from contested worlds. What does he want with Calden? Tiara asked quietly. Nathaniel's eyes widened slightly at her use of the Delvosian's name, but he didn't comment on it. I'm not entirely sure, but he's been particularly interested in Delvosian artifacts and specimens since the Imperial Science Directorate published that study on their unique biological properties. He steered her toward the Meridian delegation, smoothly transitioning back into his role as host, but Tiara's unease persisted. She excused herself as soon as it was socially acceptable and made her way to the menagerie wing, a sense of urgency driving her steps. The security panel outside Calden's quarters indicated active surveillance. Someone was watching or had been watching recently. Tiara quickly overrode the system with her family access code, replacing the live feed with a loop of earlier footage showing an empty room. When she entered, Calden was standing by the window, looking out at the night sky as he had the previous evening. He turned as she approached, his expression cautious. You seem troubled, he observed. Someone's taking an unusual interest in you, she said without preamble. An Imperial official named Varric. Do you know him? A shadow crossed Calden's features. I know of him. He was involved in the final subjugation of Delvos. His specialty is extracting value from conquered worlds, both resources and people. My father thinks he wants to seize you for some Imperial project, Tiara said. Though I don't understand why one Delvosian would matter so much to the Empire. Calden was silent for a moment, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Because I'm not just any Delvosian, he finally said. What I told you before was true. I am the last of the ruling bloodline, what your people would call the royal family of Delvos. Even if that's true, why would it matter now? Delvos is fully under Imperial control. Is it? Calden stepped closer, his voice dropping. There are things your empire doesn't understand about my world and my people. The connection between the royal bloodline and Delvos itself is more than symbolic. It's biological, quantum entangled over generations. We are the keys to technologies your scientists have barely begun to comprehend. Tiara frowned. You're saying Varric wants you for some kind of research? Or to ensure such research can never happen? Calden reached up to touch the control collar at his neck. This isn't just to mark me as property. It's specifically designed to inhibit certain neural pathways unique to my lineage. Tiara stared at him, trying to process the implications. If he was telling the truth, then he wasn't simply an exotic acquisition, but potentially a being of significant political importance. I need proof, she said finally. Something to verify what you're claiming. Calden held her gaze for a long moment, then slowly reached beneath his tunic and withdrew a small object on a fine chain, a pendant or talisman of some kind. It was made of a material Tiara didn't recognize, somewhat like mother of pearl, but with an inner light that seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. This is a fragment of the crown of Delvos, he said quietly. It responds only to the royal bloodline. Anyone else who touches it experiences nothing but dead matter. He extended his hand, offering her the pendant. With hesitation, Tiara reached out and touched it. For an instant, she felt nothing, just smooth, cool material against her fingertips. Then, suddenly, a shock of sensation. Images, sounds, feelings cascading through her mind. A world of sweeping purple plains and towering crystal formations. A people with pale eyes and luminescent hair, moving through vast halls of living technology. And underlying it all, a profound sense of connection to the land, to each other, to something greater than individual existence. She snatched her hand back with a gasp. What was that? She demanded. A glimpse, Calden said simply. A memory fragment stored within the crown shard. You shouldn't have been able to perceive any of it. He looked at her with new intensity. Unless, whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the sudden blaring of an alarm. Red emergency lights began to pulse throughout the chamber. Security breach in Sector 7, an automated voice announced. All personnel to assigned stations. Sector 7, the menagerie wing. Tiara's blood ran cold. We need to move, she said urgently. Now. Calden's expression hardened. Varric, most likely. She activated the door panel, checking the corridor. They'll expect you to be here, in your assigned quarters. What are you suggesting? Calden asked, watching her closely. Tiara made a split-second decision that she knew might change everything. That we disappoint them. She accessed the security panel and entered a command sequence. The indicator light on Calden's control collar blinked twice, then faded as the locking mechanism disengaged. The collar remained in place, but was now merely an ornament rather than a restraint. Calden's eyes widened slightly, his hand moving to his throat. Why? He asked softly. Because I'm starting to think you might be telling the truth, Tiara replied. And if you are, I need to understand what that means. For all of us. The sound of approaching footsteps ended their exchange. Tiara quickly led the way into the corridor, heading not toward the main exit, but deeper into the menagerie complex. Where are we going? Calden asked, moving with surprising stealth for someone who had been in captivity. There's a service passage that connects to the old tunnel system beneath the estate, Tiara explained in hushed tones. It was part of the original defensive network before the modern security systems were installed. They passed holding areas for various creatures, some of which reacted to their presence with soft calls or movements. One section housed semi-sentient plant-like beings that extended tendrils toward them as they hurried by, sensing the unusual activity. You know these passages well, Calden observed as Tiara navigated a complex junction without hesitation. I explored them as a child, she admitted, when the formal gardens and supervised activities became too constraining. A small smile touched Calden's lips. Perhaps you have more of a rebellious spirit than your father realizes. They reached a maintenance access point, disguised as part of the habitat control system. Tiara quickly entered another override code, revealing a narrow passage beyond. This will take us to... She was cut off by the unmistakable hum of an Imperial energy weapon being activated behind them. It won't take you anywhere, Lady Tiara, said Lord Varric's cold voice. Except perhaps to a very unfortunate explanation before the Imperial Security Council. They turned slowly to face him. Varric stood flanked by 4 elite Imperial guards, their weapons trained on Calden. Lord Varric, Tiara said, striving for composure. This is a private House Vissen matter. You have no jurisdiction here. Varric's smile was devoid of warmth. When it concerns fugitives of special imperial interest, I have jurisdiction everywhere on Corva Prime. His gaze shifted to Calden, especially when those fugitives have disguised their true nature and infiltrated a noble house. I've infiltrated nothing, Calden said calmly. I was brought here against my will. A convenient story, Varric replied. But we both know who and what you really are, last Prince of Delvos. Or should I say, the last key to the Echo Crown. Tiara glanced between them. Sensing the weight of history and conflict she only partly understood. Whatever you think he is, she said firmly, he's under House Vissen's protection now. Varric laughed, the sound echoing unpleasantly in the confined space. My dear Lady Tiara, you have no idea what forces you're interfering with. This specimen is imperial property, classified at the highest level. Your father overstepped by purchasing him, even unknowingly. My father is a lord of Corva Prime, Tiara countered. Any accusation against House Vissen must be brought before the Council of Houses, not handled through armed intrusion into our estate. Under normal circumstances, perhaps, Varric conceded. But these are hardly normal circumstances. He gestured to his guards. Secure the Delvosian. Ensure the neural inhibitor is reactivated at maximum capacity. As the guards moved forward, Calden suddenly shifted his stance. It was a subtle movement, but something in it made Tiara instinctively step back. What happened next occurred so quickly she could barely process it. Calden moved with inhuman speed and precision, flowing between the advancing guards like water through stones. One moment he was beside her. The next, he had disarmed the first guard and was using the man's own weapon to incapacitate the second. The remaining guards fired their weapons, but Calden seemed to anticipate each shot, moving just enough to avoid the energy blast that scorched the wall behind him. Another fluid sequence of movements, and the third guard was down, then the fourth. Varric backed away, his composed facade cracking as he fumbled for his own sidearm. Before he could raise it, Calden was before him, the commandeered weapon pointed at Varric's chest. Those neural inhibitors don't work quite as well as you thought, Calden said quietly. My people have been resisting your technology for generations. Tiara stared in shock, both at the display of combat prowess and at the revelation of just how dangerous her pet truly was. Yet strangely, she felt no fear for herself, only a growing certainty that there was far more to the conflict between Delvos and the Empire than she had ever been taught. The standoff was broken by the sound of more approaching footsteps, heavier this time, accompanied by the distinctive sound of House Vissen security armor. Tiara, Nathaniel's voice echoed through the corridor. Stand clear. A moment later, her father appeared, followed by a contingent of house guards. He assessed the situation with a quick glance. The downed Imperial guards, Varric at Calden's mercy, Tiara standing unharmed but clearly complicit in whatever had transpired. Lower your weapon, Nathaniel commanded Calden, though his gaze was fixed on Varric. Immediately, after a tense moment, Calden slowly lowered the energy pistol but didn't relinquish it entirely. Lord Varric, Nathaniel continued, his voice dangerously controlled. Perhaps you'd care to explain why Imperial forces are conducting an armed operation in my home without House Vissen's consent or knowledge. Varric straightened his uniform, tried to recover his dignity. This is an Imperial security matter, Nathaniel. Your acquisition is not what you think it is. It's a high-value asset that was being transferred to a secure research facility before it was mistakenly diverted to the exotic pet market. Tiara interjected. He's a sentient being with a name and a history your empire tried to erase. Nathaniel shot her a warning glance before turning back to Varric. Even if what you say is true, there are protocols. House Vissen would be due compensation, formal hearings. There's no time for bureaucratic niceties, Varric snapped. That creature is the last genetic key to technologies that could destabilize the entire empire. Every moment it remains free from proper containment puts us all at risk. Nathaniel's expression hardened. My daughter seems to believe otherwise. And while we may have our differences, I trust her judgment. He turned to Tiara. Explain. In that moment, Tiara realized she stood at crossroads. She could retreat to the safety of her privileged life, hand Kalden over to Varric, and maintain the status quo. Or she could take a step into unknown territory, guided only by her growing conviction that the Empire's narrative, the only narrative she had ever known, might be built on foundations of deception. Kalden is the last of the Delvosian royal line, she said firmly. Varric wants him because he's afraid of what Kalden represents. The truth about how the Empire really subjugated Delvos and its people. About technologies and connections we've never tried to understand, only control or destroy. Nathaniel's gaze shifted to Kalden. Is this true? It is, Kalden affirmed. My people never wanted war with the Empire. We sought only to maintain our independence and our connection to our world. But the Empire couldn't tolerate any power it didn't directly control. Varric made a sound of disgust. Romantic nonsense. Delvos was a security threat with dangerous technologies and biological capabilities. Its integration was necessary for the stability of the sector. Integration? Kalden's voice took on a hard edge. Is that what you call the systematic destruction of our cities? The harvesting of our children for their genetic markers? The deliberate severing of our connections to the Echo Crown? The raw pain in his voice seemed to affect even Nathaniel, whose expression softened momentarily. An uncomfortable silence filled the corridor as the implications of Kalden's words hung in the air. Nathaniel, Varric said finally, his voice lowered to a dangerous calm, you stand at a precipice. The decision you make now will determine the future of House Vissen. The Emperor himself has taken an interest in this matter. Consider carefully where your loyalties lie. Nathaniel looked from Varric to his daughter, and finally to Kalden, the supposed pet who had demonstrated abilities far beyond what any captive should possess. His jaw tightened as he weighed decades of loyalty to the Empire against the disturbing revelations of the last few minutes. House Vissen's loyalties have never been in question, he said carefully. But neither has our right to due process under Imperial law. He turned to Tiara. What exactly are you proposing? Before Tiara could answer, the sound of additional troops echoed from further down the corridor. Varric's reinforcements were arriving. There's no time, Kalden said urgently. They'll take me, and they'll silence anyone who knows what I am, including your daughter. Something dangerous flashed in Nathaniel's eyes at the implied threat to Tiara. He made a swift decision. The northeastern passage, he said abruptly. Take it to the end, then 3 levels down. It leads to the old transport tunnels beneath the city. The access code is 847 Alpha 6. He fixed Kalden with a hard stare. If you harm my daughter in any way, I will hunt you across the stars. Varric's face contorted with rage. This is treason, Nathaniel. The Emperor will have your head, and your house will be stripped of all rank. Perhaps, Nathaniel replied coldly, but he'll have to prove it first. He nodded to his house guards. Escort Lord Varric and his men to their shuttle. Ensure they leave the estate immediately. As the house guards moved to comply, Varric's expression turned venomous. This isn't over, Vissen. Not by a long measure. Go, Nathaniel said to Tiara, ignoring Varric's threat. I'll delay them as long as I can. Tiara hesitated, suddenly aware of the enormity of what was happening. Father. Now, Tiara, he insisted, his voice softening. For once in your life, don't argue. With a final nod of gratitude, Tiara turned and plunged into the maintenance passage with Kalden close behind. The last thing she saw was her father, standing resolute, facing Varric with the full dignity of House Vissen, knowingly risking everything for a daughter he didn't fully understand and a cause he wasn't certain he believed in. The northeastern passage was narrow and dimly lit, designed for maintenance drones rather than human traffic. Tiara led the way, her formal evening attire now torn and smudged, her carefully arranged hair coming loose as they hurried through the confined space. Your father surprised me, Kalden said as they navigated a particularly tight junction. I wouldn't have expected him to defy an Imperial official. He surprised me too, Tiara admitted. But he's always been protective in his own way. She paused at a vertical access shaft. This should take us down to the level he mentioned. As they descended the ladder, the distant sounds of pursuit echoed through the tunnel system. Varric had either escaped the house guards or called in additional forces. Either way, their lead was shrinking. When we reached the transport tunnels, where do we go? Tiara asked, trying to focus on the immediate problem rather than the terrifying reality that she had just become a fugitive from the Empire. Black Wind, Calden replied without hesitation. The lower levels, where Imperial presence is minimal. There are people there who can help us. People? You mean other Delvosians? And others who have reason to resist the Empire. The underground is vast, if you know where to look. They reached the bottom of the shaft and found themselves in an older section of tunnel, part of Corvo Prime's original infrastructure, built before the current ruling houses had established their dominance. The air was stale but breathable, and the emergency lighting still functioned, casting everything in a dim blue glow. Tiara quickly located the access panel and entered the code her father had provided. A heavy security door slid open, revealing a much larger tunnel beyond, wide enough for transport vehicles, though it appeared long abandoned. This must connect to the old commercial network, Tiara said, recognizing elements of the design from her historical studies. It was replaced by the elevated transport system during the last major urban redevelopment, which means it's mostly forgotten, Calden observed. Perfect for those who don't want to be found. They moved quickly through the main tunnel, alert for any sign of pursuit. The distant sounds had faded, suggesting they might have gained some time, but neither of them slowed their pace. So, Tiara said after they had been walking for nearly half an hour, are you going to explain what an Echo Crown is and why it matters enough for Varric to commit treason himself by attacking a noble house? Calden glanced at her, assessing. Then, seemingly satisfied with what he saw, he began to explain. The Echo Crown is not a crown as your people would understand it. It's a biological technological interface created thousands of years ago when Delvos first developed space travel. It allows the ruling bloodline to connect with the planetary consciousness of Delvos itself. Planetary consciousness. Tiara frowned. You mean the planet is alive? Sentient. Not in the way you or I are sentient, Calden clarified. It's more like a vast, distributed intelligence, an emergent property of Delvos' unique ecosystem. The Echo Crown allows communication with that intelligence, and, through it, access to technologies your empire could barely comprehend, such as quantum entanglement across vast distances, biological manipulation at the cellular level, and most significantly, the ability to disrupt certain types of control technology, like the neural collars used throughout the Empire. Tiara stopped walking, the implications hitting her like a physical blow. You're saying this crown could potentially free every enslaved person in the Empire? In theory, which is precisely why the Empire has spent the last decade trying to either control or destroy it. Calden's expression darkened. They dismantled it, scattered the pieces across a dozen worlds. But they could never fully disable it because they couldn't understand the quantum biological principles involved. For that, they needed someone of the royal bloodline. You, Tiara said quietly. Me, the last carrier of the genetic markers necessary to reconnect with the Echo Crown. Varric has been hunting for surviving members of my line since the fall of Delvos. I thought I had successfully hidden my identity, but somehow I was exposed. They resumed walking, the silence between them now weighted with the enormity of what Calden had revealed. If what you're saying is true, Tiara said finally, then the Empire isn't just maintaining order across the stars. It's actively suppressing technologies that could change everything. Now you understand why they fear me. Calden's pale eyes seemed to glow in the dim tunnel light. And why your decision to help me is more significant than you realized. Before Tiara could respond, a distant rumble shook the tunnel, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. They've breached the upper access points, Calden said grimly. We need to move faster. They broke into a run, following the main tunnel as it curved gradually downward, deeper beneath the gleaming city of Black Wind. The air grew progressively warmer and more humid. They were approaching the industrial sector, where waste processing and environmental systems maintained the comfortable conditions of the upper levels. Finally, they reached a junction where the main tunnel branched into several smaller passages. Calden paused, oriented himself, then pointed to the leftmost tunnel. This way, it leads to the underlevels of Blackwind's eastern district, the least patrolled, the most densely populated with those the Empire would rather forget. As they entered this new passage, the character of their surroundings began to change. Signs of habitation appeared. Makeshift lighting, crude markers on the walls, occasionally even simple dwellings built into alcoves and maintenance chambers. People live down here? Tiara asked, unable to hide her shock at the conditions. Those who have no place in the Empire's perfect society, Calden replied. Former servants who outlived their usefulness. Dissidents who escaped execution but not exile. And many Delvosians who managed to evade the labor camps. The tunnel eventually opened into a vast subterranean space. What had once been a transport hub, now transformed into a sprawling underground community. Improvised dwellings constructed from salvaged materials filled the space, along with small markets, communal cooking areas, and even rudimentary hydroponic gardens nourished by artificial lighting. And everywhere, people, more than Tiara could have imagined, living beneath the pristine streets of Blackwind. Many wore the remnants of control collars, disabled or modified. Others bore visible marks of their origins from various conquered worlds. All of them watched with wary eyes as Calden led Tiara through the settlement. They don't trust me, Tiara observed quietly, acutely aware of her fine clothing and unblemished skin, clear signs of her privileged upbringing. They have little reason to trust anyone from the upper city, Calden acknowledged. But they will respect that you're with me. As if to confirm his words, several people stepped forward, greeting Calden with subtle gestures that Tiara didn't recognize, some form of Delvosian communication, perhaps. He responded in kind, then spoke rapidly in a language she couldn't understand. One of the group, an older woman with the same pale eyes as Calden, though her once platinum hair had faded to dull silver, approached Tiara directly. So, she said in heavily accented common, the daughter of House Vissen walks among the voiceless. These are strange times indeed. This is Elder Roden, Calden explained. She was a member of the Delvosian High Council before the invasion. Now she leads what remains of our people on Corva Prime. Tiara inclined her head respectfully. I'm grateful for your welcome, Elder Roden, though I understand your caution. The old woman's eyes narrowed. Caution? Girl, if it were up to me, you would already be dead. A Vissen in our midst is a danger beyond measuring. She helped me escape, Calden interjected. Firmly, at great personal cost. Her father defied Varric himself to give us time. Elder Roden's expression remained skeptical. The nobility have played at conscience before when it suited their purposes. What makes this one different? Before Calden could answer, Tiara stepped forward. I make no claims to be different, she said, meeting the elder's gaze directly. Until today, I accepted without question the world as it was presented to me. I never looked beneath the surface of my privilege. She glanced around at the makeshift community. But now that I have seen, I cannot unsee. I cannot return to ignorance. Elder Roden studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then, to Tiara's surprise, she laughed, a dry, rasping sound with little humor in it. Well spoken, for one of your kind. We shall see if your actions match your words. She turned to Calden. Kulme, the council must hear of Varric's actions. If he has recognized you, then our timetable has accelerated. She led them deeper into the underground settlement, through passages guarded by alert figures armed with a mix of imperial weapons and crude, improvised armaments. Eventually, they reached what appeared to be a former maintenance control center, now repurposed as a meeting space. Inside, a diverse group waited, not just Delvosians, Tiara noted, but representatives from at least half a dozen different worlds. All bore the marks of imperial subjugation in some form, and all regarded her with the same suspicion Elder Roden had shown. Speak, called in. One of them said, a tall, gaunt man with intricate scarification across his face, marking him as a survivor of the Morai purges. Tell us what has transpired. Calden recounted the events at House Vissen succinctly: his capture and sale, Tiara's intervention, Varric's attack, and Nathaniel's surprising decision to aid their escape. Varric knows who I am, he concluded, which means the Emperor does as well. They will tear apart Corvo Prime looking for me, for us. Then perhaps it is time to give them something else to focus on, said another council member, a woman whose features were partially obscured by a respirator, suggesting origins from one of the heavy atmosphere worlds. The Nobles' Conclave is in 3 days. Every major house will be represented, along with the imperial governance. You cannot be suggesting what I think you are, Elder Roden said sharply. We are not ready. The recovery operation for the final Echo Crown components is still underway. We may not have a choice, Calden countered. If the Empire knows I survived, they will increase security across all suspected locations. This might be our only opportunity. Tiara listened to the debate with growing confusion and concern. What exactly are you planning? The council members exchanged glances, seemingly debating how much to reveal in her presence. Finally, Calden turned to her. For years, we have been working to recover the scattered components of the Echo Crown, he explained. Recently, our agents discovered that the final, critical piece was seized by Imperial researchers and is being stored in a secure facility beneath the Grand Assembly Hall, the very location where the Nobles' Conclave will be held. You're planning to infiltrate the most secure Imperial facility on Corvo Prime? Tiara asked incredulously. During an event attended by every major political figure in the sector? Yes, Calden confirmed. And with the complete Echo Crown, I can trigger a resonance cascade that will disable every control collar in the Empire simultaneously. Millions freed in an instant. The scale of what they were proposing was staggering. Not just a localized uprising, but a coordinated empire-wide revolution triggered by a single event. My father will be at that conclave, Tiara said quietly, along with representatives from every noble house. What happens to them in your scenario? The silence that followed her question was answer enough. The revolution Calden and the others planned would mean the end of the imperial system, and quite possibly the end of the noble houses that had prospered under it, including House Vissen. I see, she said, her voice steady despite the conflict raging within her. And what role do you envision for me in this plan? More glances were exchanged among the council members. Elder Roden spoke first. You have knowledge of the upper city security protocols, access codes, the habits and weaknesses of the noble houses. You could be useful if I choose to help you, Tiara pointed out, which would mean betraying my family, my house, and everything I've been raised to value. Did your family not already make their choice? The Morai man asked. Your father aided your escape, knowing what it might mean. Tiara considered this. Had her father truly understood the implications of his actions? Or had he simply been protecting his daughter without fully grasping the larger conflict? I need time to think, she said finally. This is more than I expected when I helped Calden escape. Elder Roden nodded reluctantly. Dawn is still hours away. Rest while you can. But know this, daughter of Vissen. Events have been set in motion that cannot be stopped. With or without your help, the Echo Crown will be completed. The only question is how much blood will be spilled in the process. As the council meeting dispersed, Calden guided Tiara to a small side chamber that had been prepared for them. A modest space with simple bedding and a water purifier, luxurious by the standards of the underground community. I know this is overwhelming, he said once they were alone. You've had your entire worldview challenged in the span of a single day. Tiara sat heavily on one of the sleeping pallets, the exhaustion of their escape finally catching up with her. That's somewhat of an understatement. Yesterday, you were a fascinating new addition to our menagerie. Today, you're the key to an empire-wide revolution, and I'm a fugitive hiding in the Undercity. She looked up at him, a hint of her old sardonic humor surfacing. Quite the promotion for both of us. Calden smiled faintly, but his eyes remained serious. You don't have to join our cause, Tiara. I'm grateful for what you've done already. If you wish, We can find a way to get you off-world, somewhere beyond the Empire's reach, and leave my father to face the consequences alone." She shook her head. "No. Whatever happens next, I'm part of it now." She eyed him speculatively, though I still have questions. "This Echo Crown, how do you know it will work as you believe? That it won't simply kill everyone wearing Control Collar instead of freeing them?" "Because we've tested it on a smaller scale," Calden explained, sitting across from her. "The components we've already recovered have allowed us to free thousands across several worlds. But to reach everyone, to create a resonance powerful enough to span the Empire, that requires the complete crown and someone of the royal bloodline to activate it. And once everyone is free, what then? Chaos? Revenge against the nobility?" Calden's expression grew troubled. "Some want that, yes. There's much anger among the subjugated peoples, justifiable anger. But I believe we can build something better than the Empire without repeating its mistakes. Freedom doesn't have to mean destruction." Tiara was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. Then she reached a decision. "If I help you," she said carefully, "I want your word that you'll do everything in your power to ensure my father's safety. Whatever his past actions, he chose to help us when it mattered." Calden held her gaze steadily. "You have my word. I've seen enough death, Tiara. I have no desire to add to it unnecessarily." "Then I'm with you," she said, surprised by how right the decision felt, despite everything it would cost her. "But we'll need more than just access codes and security knowledge. We'll need a plan that gives us a realistic chance of success." "Do you have something in mind?" Tiara smiled grimly. "As a matter of fact, I do. But you're not going to like it. It starts with me turning myself in." As dawn broke over Blackwind, the news had already spread throughout the upper city. Lady Tiara Vissen had returned, claiming to have been abducted by a dangerous Delvosian fugitive who had manipulated her mind using outlawed technology. She was confined to House Vissen's medical wing, under close observation for lingering effects of the alleged mental influence. Lord Varric, arriving at House Vissen with a contingent of Imperial security forces, found himself diplomatically but firmly blocked from interviewing the young noblewoman by a phalanx of medical specialists and house security. "Lady Tiara is in a fragile state," Nathaniel Vissen informed him coldly. "Her treatment and recovery must take precedence over your investigation." Lord Varric. "Surely even Imperial authority respects the sanctity of medical necessity." The public narrative was clear and carefully crafted. House Vissen had been victimized by a cunning infiltrator, their precious heir temporarily compromised, but now safely recovered. No hint of collaboration or treason, just the unfortunate exploitation of noble compassion. Meanwhile, beneath the city, preparations accelerated. The underground network spread word through hidden channels, gathering resources and positioning operatives. The final components for what would become the most significant uprising in Imperial history were moving into place. And in a secure chamber deep within House Vissen's medical wing, Tiara and her father spoke in hushed tones, away from monitoring devices and prying ears. "The conclave begins tomorrow," Nathaniel said gravely. "Varric has increased security beyond anything I've ever seen, but he's also suspicious of your sudden return. He doesn't believe the abduction story." "He doesn't need to believe it," Tiara replied. "He just needs to be uncertain enough to focus on the wrong things at the wrong time." She studied her father's face, the new lines of worry, the shadows under his eyes. "You can still distance yourself from this. Claim I'm still affected by whatever Calden did to me. Protect House Vissen." Nathaniel shook his head slowly. "I've been thinking about what you told me, about the reality of Delvos, about what the Empire has been doing all these years while we looked away." His voice dropped even lower. "I've been complicit, Tiara. We all have been. Looking the other way, while telling ourselves we were bringing civilization to the stars. It's not too late to change that," she said gently. "But what we're planning, it will mean the end of everything we've known. The noble houses, our position, all of it. Perhaps that's as it should be." Nathaniel's expression was resolute. "House Vissen has stood for 15 generations. If it falls, let it fall for something worthy, not clinging to a corrupt system out of fear or greed. Tiara felt a surge of pride and love for her father, emotion she had always felt but rarely expressed in their formal, tradition-bound relationship. "Then we proceed as planned," she said. "The underground forces will move into position during the opening ceremonies. Calden and his team will access the secure facility through the maintenance tunnels. And I will attend the conclave as expected," Nathaniel finished. The returned victim, making a brave public appearance to demonstrate House Vissen's resilience. His face darkened. "While I keep Varric distracted with procedural complaints and diplomatic posturing. If all goes as planned, the Echo Crown will be activated during the Emperor's address," Tiara continued. "The moment when every noble and official is gathered in one place." Nathaniel looked troubled. "And if it doesn't go as planned?" Tiara met his gaze steadily. "Then House Vissen falls, and we with it. But we fall having tried to right a wrong that has persisted for too long." As darkness settled over Blackwind once more, final preparations were made on both sides of the coming conflict. Imperial security forces established checkpoints throughout the upper city, while beneath the streets, the underground resistance moved through shadow and secret passage, guided by detailed schematics provided by House Vissen. And in a small, hidden chamber near the eastern undercity, Calden stood before a gathering of resistance leaders, the recovered pieces of the Echo Crown arrayed before him. The fragments gleamed with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, responding to the royal bloodline that flowed in his veins. "Tomorrow," he said simply, his voice carrying to every corner of the crowded room, "we reclaim what was taken from us, not just for Delvos, but for every world that has suffered under Imperial rule. Tomorrow, the voiceless will speak again." A murmur of agreement passed through the assembled group, representatives from dozens of subjugated peoples, united by common purpose despite centuries of engineered division by Imperial policy. "And what of the nobility?" asked a Scar Morai fighter. "What of those who have profited from our suffering?" "Justice, not vengeance," Calden replied firmly. "Those who resist will be met with necessary force. But our goal is freedom, not a new tyranny of our own making." His gaze swept the room. "Remember, without Lady Tiara and Lord Nathaniel, we would not be standing here now. There are allies among the privileged, if we have the wisdom to recognize them." Not everyone looked convinced, but none voiced open objection. The momentum of events had carried them to this point, and now there was only forward. As the meeting concluded, Elder Roden approached Calden privately. "You trust the Vissen girl," she observed. It wasn't quite a question. "Idol, Koljan affirmed. Because of what she did for you, or because of what you sense in her?" Calden's expression revealed nothing. "Both, perhaps." The elders studied him with ancient, knowing eyes. "You've tested her with the crown shard." She responded, "Yes. That should not be possible for anyone not of Delvosian blood." Elder Roden's voice sharpened. "What aren't you telling us?" Calden hesitated, then spoke quietly. "There are anomalies in her genetic structure, similar patterns to our own. It's subtle, but unmistakable to those who know what to look for. Impossible redembreted. Unless." Her eyes widened with sudden understanding. The diaspora, when the first explorers from Delvos encountered this sector, centuries before the Empire, there were settlements, exchanges of knowledge, and perhaps more. It would explain her sensitivity to the crown, Calden agreed, and perhaps why she was able to see beyond her conditioning when others could not. Elder Roden contemplated this revelation. "Does she?" "No, no, and now is not the time to tell her. She has chosen her path for her own reasons. That is enough." The elder nodded slowly. "Very well, but if we survive what comes tomorrow, she will need to understand what she truly is. The Echo Crown will respond to her as well as to you. She must be prepared for that connection." Calden's expression grew distant, his thoughts turning to the young noblewoman who had upended her entire existence to help a supposed pet, and who now risked everything for a cause that should have been alien to her. "She is stronger than she knows," he said softly. "She will be ready when the time comes." The grand assembly hall of Blackwind stood at the center of the upper city, a towering structure of crystalline spires and sweeping archways that caught the morning sunlight and fractured it into 1,000 prismatic beams. It was a testament to imperial architectural prowess and to the wealth extracted from 100 conquered worlds to fund such magnificence. As the nobles and officials of the Alderaan Empire gathered for the conclave, the hall's vast interior buzzed with politics and posturing. Representatives from each of the 12 houses of Corva Prime moved through the space in their distinctive colors, attended by retinues of advisors and security personnel. Imperial officials in their severe black uniforms created islands of authority throughout the crowd, while servants circulated with refreshments, their golden control collars gleaming. Tiara entered on her father's arm, her appearance carefully crafted to project both vulnerability and determination. Her gown, while appropriately formal for the occasion, was simpler than her usual attire, a signal of the ordeal she had supposedly endured. Subtle cosmetics enhanced the pallor of her face and the shadows beneath her eyes, while her hair was arranged in a modest style that suggested recovery rather than celebration. "Half the room is staring at us," she murmured to Nathaniel as they made their way toward their assigned seating area. "Let them stare," he replied, equally quietly. "Every moment their attention is on us is a moment they're not looking elsewhere." They had barely taken their seats when Lord Varric approached, flanked by 2 Imperial guards whose presence was an unsubtle reminder of his authority. "Lord Nathaniel, Lady Tiara," he greeted them with a thin smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. "How fortuitous that you were able to attend despite recent unfortunate events." "House Vissen has never shirked its ceremonial duties," Nathaniel replied smoothly. "And my daughter insisted on demonstrating that terrorists and fugitives cannot intimidate our family." Varric's gaze fixed on Tiara. "Indeed, Lady Tiara, I must commend your remarkable recovery. One might almost forget that just days ago you were allegedly under the influence of dangerous Delvosian technology. Some experiences leave invisible scars, Lord Varric," Tiara responded, her voice carefully modulated to suggest lingering trauma. "But House Vissen does not yield to adversity." "So I see." Varric's smile tightened. "I look forward to hearing a complete account of your abduction once today's ceremonies are concluded. The Emperor himself has expressed interest in your unique experience." The implied threat was clear, but before either Tiara or Nathaniel could respond, a melodic tone sounded throughout the hall, signaling the imminent arrival of the Imperial entourage. "We must take our places," Varric said, inclining his head slightly. "This conversation will continue later." As he departed, Nathaniel and Tiara exchanged a brief glance. The clock was ticking. Somewhere beneath their feet, Calden and his team would be moving into position, navigating the maintenance tunnels toward the secure facility where the final component of the Echo Crown was stored. Everything now depended on precise timing and the element of surprise. The resistance forces were in place throughout the city, waiting for the signal. House Vissen's loyalists within the Assembly Hall security were prepared to create diversions at the critical moment. And Tiara herself had memorized the exact location where she needed to be when the crown was activated. The Imperial procession began to enter, heralded by a fanfare that echoed through the vast space. Dignitaries and high officials filed in first, followed by the Emperor's inner council. The Emperor himself would enter last, once all were assembled, the moment when security would be at its highest alert, but also when every eye would be focused on the main entrance rather than the service areas. "It's time," Nathaniel whispered, squeezing Tiara's hand briefly before they both rose with the rest of the assembly to honor the procession. As the ceremony began, Tiara felt a strange sensation, a subtle vibration that seemed to resonate not through the air, but through her very being. She knew without being told that Calden had reached the secure facility, that he was in proximity to the Echo Crown components. Even without physical contact, some connection existed between them, perhaps through the crown shard she had touched, or perhaps through something deeper that she didn't yet understand. The vibration intensified as the Emperor's personal guard entered the hall. Tiara's heart raced, though she maintained her composed exterior. In minutes, perhaps seconds, everything would change. The world she had known her entire life was about to transform irrevocably. A commotion near one of the service entrances drew some attention, the first of the planned diversions. Security personnel moved subtly toward the disturbance, creating the small gap in coverage that the resistance had been counting on. Tiara felt rather than heard a distinctive shift in the vibration resonating through her. The crown components were being assembled. Calden was preparing to activate the device. The Emperor entered, resplendent in ceremonial attire that gleamed with precious metals and gems from 100 worlds. The assembly bowed as one, all eyes fixed on the supreme ruler of the Alderaan Empire. And in that moment of perfect distraction, the world beneath Blackwind changed forever. The vibration that had been building within Tiara suddenly expanded outward in a wave of sensation that was neither sound nor light, but something more fundamental. It passed through stone and metal, through flesh and bone, touching every being connected to the quantum network of control technology that underpinned the Empire's dominion. Throughout the assembly hall, control collars simultaneously deactivated, their locking mechanisms disengaging with audible clicks that rippled across the vast space. The servants' expressions transformed from carefully neutral to shocked, disbelieving, as they realized what had happened. The wave expanded outward, traveling at quantum speeds that defied conventional physics. Across Blackwind, across Corva Prime, across the entire Alderaan system and beyond, millions of control devices failed simultaneously, their sophisticated circuitry overloaded by the resonance cascade of the fully assembled Echo Crown. In the assembly hall, confusion erupted into chaos as Imperial officials realized what was happening. Security forces moved to contain the suddenly liberated servants, while nobles looked around in bewilderment and growing fear. Varric's voice cut through the din, shouting orders to his troops. Secure the Emperor. Lock down the facility. This is a coordinated attack. But it was too late. From service entrances and maintenance access points, resistance fighters emerged. Not in a violent assault, but in a coordinated demonstration of newly reclaimed freedom. They carried no weapons, but moved with purpose, forming a human barrier between the Imperial forces and the liberated servants. And then Calden appeared, entering the main hall through a side entrance, the assembled Echo Crown held before him. It was not the ornate headpiece its name might suggest, but a complex technological artifact pulsing with inner light, responding to his touch, to his bloodline. People of the Alderaan Empire, his voice carried clearly across the hall, amplified by the crown's resonance. For too long, you have lived under the illusion of peace through dominance. Today, that illusion ends. Imperial guards moved to intercept him, but found themselves blocked by more resistance members emerging from concealment, some of them wearing the uniforms of House Vissen security. Varric turned to Nathaniel, his face contorted with rage. This is your doing. A correction of long-standing wrongs, Nathaniel replied calmly. Nothing more, nothing less. The Emperor himself remained oddly still, surrounded by his personal guard but making no command, as though waiting to see how events would unfold before committing to a response. Tiara moved then, stepping away from her father, walking directly toward Calden. The crowd parted before her, some recognizing her as Lady Vissen, others simply responding to the unusual certainty of her movement. As she approached Calden, the Echo Crown's luminescence intensified, reacting to her presence in a way that caught even Calden by surprise. When she stopped before him, he studied her face with new understanding. You feel it too, he said, not a question, but a recognition. Yes, Tiara admitted, the resonance humming through her veins like a forgotten melody, suddenly remembered. What does it mean? It means you carry traces of Delvos within you, Calden replied. Somewhere in your ancestral line, our people's connected. The crown recognizes its own. A commotion from the Imperial guards interrupted their exchange. Varric had broken through the resistance line, his personal sidearm drawn, and aimed directly at Calden. Step away from him, Lady Tiara, Varric commanded. This terrorist has clearly affected your mind with. Delvosian technology. We can help you, but you must move now. Tiara didn't move. Instead, she turned to face Varric, positioning herself between him and Calden, between the weapon and the Echo Crown. No one here is a terrorist. Lord Varric, she said, her voice carrying across the now hushed hall. What you're witnessing is liberation, not attack. Look around you. Not a single shot has been fired. No violence has been committed except by Imperial forces. It was true. Despite the chaos, the resistance had maintained remarkable discipline, focusing on securing exits and protecting the newly freed servants rather than engaging in combat. Liberation? Varric spat the word. You call this anarchy liberation? This criminal has disabled critical security systems across the planet, possibly the entire system. Do you have any idea of the damage you've done? The risks you've created? The only system affected is the one that allows you to control other sentient beings against their will, Calden stated calmly. If your society cannot function without enslaving others, perhaps it deserves to fall. Varric's finger tightened on the trigger. I will not allow generations of imperial order to be destroyed by a delusional prince and a traitorous noble girl. Several things happened simultaneously. Nathaniel Vissen lunged toward Varric, attempting to disarm him. Imperial guards moved to intercept Nathaniel, and the Emperor himself, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Enough! The single word, spoken with quiet authority, somehow cut through the chaos. All eyes turned to the Emperor, who stepped forward, his personal guard reluctantly giving him space. Lord Varric, lower your weapon, he commanded. Varric hesitated, his expression incredulous. Your Imperial Majesty, these traitors have committed. I said lower your weapon, the Emperor repeated, his tone brooking no argument. Or would you add Imperial assassination to today's events? Slowly, reluctantly, Varric complied, though his face remained twisted with fury and disbelief. The Emperor approached Calden and Tiara, studying the glowing Echo Crown with undisguised interest. So this is the great secret of Delvos, he said quietly. Not a weapon, as my advisors claimed, but a key, a means of connection. Calden inclined his head slightly. It is both less and more than your empire believed. It cannot destroy planets or power warships, but it can undo the bonds you have placed on millions. And now that you have done so, what comes next? The Emperor asked. Revenge? Revolution? The overthrow of all imperial authority? Justice, Calden replied. The right of all beings to determine their own fate. Beyond that, he glanced at Tiara. We build something new, something better. The Emperor was silent for a long moment, his ageless face unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed, a brief, startling sound in the tense atmosphere. Do you know, he said, addressing no one in particular, how long I have ruled this empire? How many reports I have read about rebellion suppressed, dissidents captured, threats neutralized, each one described as the final solution to resistance. He shook his head. And yet, here we are again. Different faces, different technologies, same fundamental conflict. He turned to address the assembled nobles and officials, many of whom appeared utterly bewildered by his calm reaction to what should have been treated as high treason. The Alderaan Empire has stood for over a millennium, he continued. It has weathered civil wars, external threats, economic collapses. It has adapted, transformed, reinvented itself when necessary. Perhaps. He glanced back at the Echo Crown, still pulsing with its inner light. Perhaps it is time for another such transformation. Varric stepped forward, his composure somewhat recovered. Your Imperial Majesty, with all due respect, you cannot seriously be considering negotiating with these criminals. The control system is fundamental to imperial security and economic stability. Without it, we will be forced to find better ways to maintain order and prosperity, the Emperor interrupted. Ways that do not rely on the subjugation of billions. It will be difficult, messy, perhaps even bloody at times, but necessary nonetheless. He turned back to Calden and Tiara. I propose an immediate cessation of hostilities. A transitional council to be formed, with representatives from both imperial authority and the liberation movement, including Delvosian representatives. His gaze sharpened. In return, there will be no summary justice against nobility or imperial officials. No pergues, no reivindicatings. A true new beginning, not merely a reversal of oppression. Tiara glanced at Calden, seeing in his face the weight of this unexpected moment. His people had suffered for generations under imperial rule. Many would want retribution, not reconciliation. And yet, the opportunity being offered was unprecedented, a chance to remake the system from within rather than tearing it down completely. I cannot speak for all the peoples who have suffered under imperial control, Calden said carefully, but I believe most would prefer a just peace to a bloody victory. He nodded. I accept your proposal, with the condition that all who wore control collars be given full citizenship, rights, and representation on this transitional council. Agreed, the Emperor said immediately, as though he had expected this requirement. Throughout the hall, a mix of reactions played across the faces of nobles and officials. Shock, outrage, fear, and in some cases, cautious relief. The empire they had known was changing before their eyes, but perhaps in a way that would allow them to adapt rather than be swept away entirely. Nathaniel Vissen, who had been restrained by imperial guards during the confrontation with Varric, was released on a subtle signal from the Emperor. He moved immediately to Tiara's side. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. "I think so, though I'm not entirely sure what just happened." "History," her father replied simply. "We just witnessed the beginning of a new era." He glanced around the hall, where imperial guards and resistance members were cautiously establishing a wary coexistence. "And somehow, we find ourselves at its center. House Vissen will never be the same," Tiara observed. Nathaniel's expression was contemplative. "Perhaps it shouldn't be. We've been complicit in a system that caused immeasurable suffering. Maybe it's time for our house to stand for something better." As the initial shock began to subside, the logistics of the unprecedented transition began to take shape. The Emperor dispatched messengers to all imperial forces, ordering a stand-down and non-interference with the newly liberated. Resistance leaders communicated with their cells throughout the city, ensuring that the unexpected peace was maintained. And somehow, in the midst of it all, Tiara found herself appointed as a liaison between the noble houses and the liberation movement, a bridge between worlds that had seemed irreconcilably opposed just hours earlier. "It won't be easy," Calden said to her as they watched imperial officials and resistance leaders tentatively beginning discussions in small groups around the hall. "There are centuries of hatred and mistrust to overcome." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Tiara replied. She studied his face, seeing in it a new openness now that the immediate crisis had passed. "What will you do now? Return to Delvos?" "Eventually," he nodded. "But first, I'm needed here. The transition will be fragile at first, vulnerable to those who preferred the old ways." His gaze drifted to Varric, who stood with a group of hardline imperial officials, their expressions dark with resentment. "And there's much still to learn about the Echo Crown, about the connection between our peoples, including what it means that the crown responded to you." Tiara touched the House Vissen pendant at her throat, considering. With a decisive movement, she removed it, feeling a symbolic weight lift as she did. "All my life, I've defined myself by this symbol, by my house, my position, my place in a system I never questioned." She held the pendant in her open palm, studying it. "Now I find I'm something else as well. Something I never suspected." "You're still Tiara Vissen," Calden said gently. "Your heritage doesn't change who you've chosen to be." "No," she agreed, "but it expands the possibilities of who I might become." She closed her hand around the pendant, not discarding it, but transforming its meaning in her mind from a symbol of ownership to a reminder of choices made and responsibilities accepted. "And right now, I choose to help build this new beginning you've started." Across the hall, Elder Roden approached them, her ancient eyes taking in the scene with a mixture of wonder and wariness. "When I woke this morning, I expected either victory through blood or defeat through betrayal, she said bluntly. I did not expect this. She gestured to the improbable peace developing around them. Nor did I, Calden admitted. But perhaps that's the point. The old patterns, oppression and violent resistance, victory and defeat, they lead us in circles. This, he indicated the tentative cooperation taking shape. This is something new. New and dangerous, Roden cautioned. Many will resist change on both sides. Then we must give them reason to embrace it instead, Tiara said. Show them that freedom and stability aren't mutually exclusive, that justice doesn't require vengeance. Roden studied her with those penetrating eyes. You speak well for one raised in privilege, Lady Vissen. Let's hope your actions match your words in the difficult days ahead. They will, Tiara promised, meeting the elder's gaze without flinching. House Vissen will stand with Delvos and all the liberated peoples. Whatever it takes to make this transition succeed. As the day progressed, word of the extraordinary events in the Grand Assembly Hall spread throughout Blackwind, across Corva Prime, and eventually to distant worlds as communication channels carried news of the Liberation Accord, as it came to be known. Control collars lay discarded in streets and homes and work sites, their power broken by the Echo Crown's resonance. In some places, violence erupted as those who had wielded authority resisted the new reality. In others, a tentative peace held as both former masters and former servants recognized that their futures were now inextricably linked. The transition would be neither simple nor painless, but it had begun a fundamental shift in how the worlds of the Alderaan Empire related to one another. 3 days later, as the first meeting of the Transitional Council prepared to convene, Tiara stood with her father on a balcony overlooking the central plaza of Blackwind. Below, crowds gathered, a mix of former nobles, former servants, resistance members, and ordinary citizens, all drawn by the historic nature of the occasion. I received word that Lord Varric departed for the outer systems this morning, Nathaniel remarked, along with several other officials who opposed the transition. Will they cause problems? Tiara asked. Almost certainly, but they'll find less support than they expect. Many who benefited from the old system have recognized that change was inevitable, that the Empire had become brittle, resistant to necessary evolution. He glanced at his daughter. Thanks in no small part to you and your Delvosian prince. Tiara felt a blush rise to her cheeks. He's not my prince, father. Nathaniel smiled knowingly, but didn't press the point. In any case, House Vissen stands in a unique position now, neither fully of the old order nor fully of the new. It gives us influence in both directions, if we're wise enough to use it constructively. And are we? Tiara asked. Wise enough, I mean. I believe we're learning to be, he replied thoughtfully. Sometimes wisdom comes from recognizing our own blindness. I was blind for too long to the suffering our system created. You helped me see. A commotion at the far end of the plaza drew their attention. Calden had emerged from the council building, the Echo Crown no longer in his hands, but its resonance still somehow visible in the aura that seemed to surround him. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Cheers from some, cautious silence from others. But notably, no hostility, no calls for retribution. As he made his way through the crowd, his gaze lifted to where Tiara stood watching. Even at a distance, their eyes met, and that strange resonance hummed between them. A connection that transcended imperial divisions, that linked their bloodlines across centuries of separation. You should go, Nathaniel said softly. The council will be starting soon, and the Vissen-Delvos alliance should present a united front. Tiara nodded, embracing her father briefly before heading toward the council chambers. As she descended to the plaza and approached Calden, she felt the weight of history around them. Not just the history they had inherited, but the history they were now actively creating. Ready for the next chapter? Calden asked as she reached him. Tiara smiled, thinking of how far they had come from their first meeting, from pet and owner to allies, and perhaps something more, from representatives of opposing worlds to architects of a new synthesis. Daughter, you wanted a new pet, But this one talks, fights, and claims he's the rightful heir, she quoted, echoing her father's words from what seemed like a lifetime ago. And you were right about all of it. Calden laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the sunlit plaza. And now, Tiara took his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable in the old order, but that now symbolized the bridge they were building between worlds. Now we build something that has no owners and no pets, she said. Only people finding their way forward together. Hand in hand, they entered the council chambers, where representatives of 100 worlds, some still wearing the marks where control collars had recently been removed, others adjusting to the new reality of shared power, awaited the beginning of a new era. Not an era free from conflict or challenge, but one founded on the radical notion that all beings deserved a voice in determining their own destiny. The collars, both literal and metaphorical, had been broken. What would be built in their place remained to be seen, but for the first time in generations, the future held possibility rather than predetermination. And in that possibility lay hope, not just for Delvos or House Vissen, but for all the worlds that had lived too long in the shadow of empire.